So to finish off the back of the car, we obviously have to build the clamshell lid, boot lid, bonnet lid that goes on the back of the car, however you want to call it. But we also need to have an infill piece that goes from the back of the car to around about this location. Now the reason we need to put that in is because the longest piece of aluminium we can get is 2 meters by 1 meter, and that will wrap around the edge, which we need the 2 meter dimension for, and the 1 meter dimension will go across this section here. Now we can cut the center out or put louvers in or a window or something to deal with the whole rear visibility problem, but one way or another we need a big sheet of something, material, to go in the top here, and that's going to be aluminium. So this fillet piece, which needs to fit in the back, has to be removable. Otherwise, making the rear beam, this stay for the intercooler, and everything else removable is kind of pointless to get the engine in and out. As much as we could maybe fit it through between the roll cage stays and everything else, it would be a nightmare. It's hard enough just getting it out the back of the car anyway, with all of this stuff open, without having to get it over the top of it as well. So this definitely wants to be bolt on, bolt off. So the way we're going to do it is have a framework around the back here, which is obviously going to provide us something to close in the back of the car. We're going to have a mesh across here, so that will mount onto the framework that goes around here, and then it's going to come up and over and form the top section at the very back of the car. And that will be our top section of bodywork, which will line up with this piece here and this piece over here, if all goes well. So the pieces we need to do that are a couple of pieces of box section. So that will go across the bottom of here, and a smaller piece which comes up this edge, followed by a couple of cross stays that come, one which will fit in the back across this section, and another one which is just on the floor, which will go down in there, and that will form the L section that fits in across the top of this intercooler.
Alright, so fast forward a couple of days, because it got real rainy all of a sudden while we were working. We did manage to get a couple of welds on and finish up the frame kind of in the right shape, but now, before we can put the skin on it, we do need to actually bolt it into the body so that it's held in exactly the right place, and then the sheet metal will be in the right place when we bend it over. So we're going to pop the intercooler out so that we can get the drill in here, poke a couple holes through, and bolt it in. So here's our half-finished removable rear deck. The top plate of it didn't quite end up as flat as we were hoping. The welding sort of warped it all out of place a bit, but it does actually give us a little bit of a ducktail kind of shape, which is kind of neat. So we're going to offer this up now. We've put the intercooler and everything back in place. Get this bolted in. Well, we popped a weld on the end here, but that's all looking good again. We've just sort of held it back down and put a new tack on, so we're going to throw a bit more primer on there, and I think we're good with this. We're probably going to move on to putting the mesh on now. In front of me here, we've got the deck. We've flipped it over so the top is away from me toward the wall. This is the mesh that we're going to put on the back. Now, this is an offcut that we've had floating around the house here for quite a while. I'm not actually sure what it is, whether it's stainless or, I don't know, it looks like it might be zinc galvanized or something. It's got that weird sort of texture to it, so we're hoping it'll weld quite nicely. The holes on it are quite small. We're doubtless going to have people in the comments saying it's going to kill the airflow. Maybe it will. I don't know. If it does, we'll drill them out or replace it with something, but this is probably fine for us. It's a big old area anyway, right? There's a huge amount of area here for air to get through, so it's probably going to be okay. So we're going to weld this onto the frame. We've got a lot of excess hanging off the sides here, so we're going to tack it on in place and cut all of the spare off the edges.
So That's the centre section done. We can now start working on the piece which goes between that out to the edge of the car around the light, which is where the real trick comes in, because we need to fit a hole into a piece of this mesh which also fits around this curve. Now, after we were done with this one, I started working on that and beating the shape of the grille to go on the car. Now I assure you, when this light isn't in here, this fits nicely up against the inside and the bottom edge, and it tucks in quite nicely against the inside of the body panel. So from here we now need to cut the hole out, but before we do that I'm going to show you how I made this one just with a hammer and dolly and a bit of steel in a vise as I make the other side.
I folded one of the edges over with a cheap metal bender, but it can't do all of them, so the rest are going to have to be done with a hammer and dolly. I used the piece from the other side, since my template wasn't quite right, drew around it, and then cut it oversize to give me an edge to fold over. Once the corners are cut out, the edges can be folded over. Just keep tapping gently at them until they're 90 degrees. For the large radius corner, with the pie cuts I made earlier, the edges start to fold up quite nicely with the hammer and dolly, and you just follow it round and keep tapping it until it's the right shape. Once you've made sure it fits, mark out where the light cluster goes and cut out a slightly undersized circle for your lights. Then it's just a question of going back and forth to the car and making sure that it's actually going to fit around the light cluster and the positioning is correct.
Now, after a not inconsiderable amount of time grinding and working with the die grinder, we've got a nice, not quite so perfect circle to go around our light, but that's not a problem. Obviously you can see this is clearly the wrong one. And Adrian, why are you sat at the wrong side of the car? Well, it's because here's one we did earlier in best Blue Peter fashion. And this sits around over here, if I can remember exactly the process for fitting it in, like that. Wow. This definitely fit a minute ago. Now that looked quite difficult. That's because it was in fact quite difficult. There is slightly too little room to be able to get the ring spanner on right over this nut here, but for the number of times this should be coming off, I don't think it's going to be a problem. But it definitely does look pretty good.
Look at it.
It is extremely good, even if I say so myself, as something that we threw together on a driveway. I am very, very happy with how this has come out. This is exactly what I wanted, with the mesh grille basically going side to side, lights poking through, and we even got a couple of accidental wins in there as well.
I just love the big threatening, like, flat boy vibe it has.
Yeah.
With the diffuser underneath, it's going to be incredible.
It's going to look really, really good, really mean from the back end.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, we got away with this little dip, giving us a little bit of a ducktail. We were going to put one on, but I cut that out way back when I was building the framework for these arches and decided that it wasn't the right idea, and we have big spoiler instead. But this is definitely going to help a little bit. So next up on this end of the car is going to be building the deck lid, which will go across the back. I mean, it's not really a boot, but it's also not a bonnet because it's at the wrong end, but whatever. The cover.
Clamshell thing.
Yes, yeah. It's a clamshell, it has three sides, so I think clamshell is probably the acceptable terminology for it. So that needs to go on, which will just be a framework that sits into the drip tray that sits around, and that'll seal it, stop water getting in, and then go across, and you get a nice big sheet of aluminium again and cover across the back. So that should be really, really good. And then maybe if we can get some stock, we can start working on the front end of the car and put some bigger sheets of bodywork down.
Yeah, because the same thing stopping us from building clamshell is stopping us doing anything up front, which is we can't get big sheets of metal right now.
Yeah.
I feel like the sensible thing to do, given this constraint, should have been start the engine. But
No.
we're kind of keeping away from that one. We're all a bit scared of it.
Yeah, it would have been, and I still keep sitting in the position of, oh, but no, let's just finish the wiring, and then the wiring needs the lights doing, and the lights needs this and that, and we end up shaving a yak. So yeah, it's not ideal.
Could do the diffuser.
We could do the diffuser, to be fair.
The back up quite nicely, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what arrives in the metal, because if we have another shortage, then we can do the diffuser. But by the same token, that still needs some big pieces of metal.
Make it up.
So yeah, that's basically where this is at. If you want to support us in our idiocy and our stupid builds and trying to get this thing along with all of the other stuff that we're working on the road, you can buy our merch. And look, I'm actually wearing a piece of it. I've got my beanie on.
I'm not.
Yeah, you're not. Yours, I think, is in the house somewhere. So yeah, you can buy merch at shop.pedalbox.show, and we've got t-shirts, long sleeve t-shirts as well, given the weather, and hoodies, hats, and more there.
Alternatively, you can jump on patreon.com/pedalboxshow and support us there from anything upward of $1 a month.
If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel as well. Make sure that you've checked the bell, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of the usual platforms of your choice. And we will catch you next time when, hopefully, it'll be looking a little bit more like a car again.
I mean, it already looks quite a lot like a car.
It does,
A very
yeah, to be
angry
fair.
one, but
It doesn't make any noise.
No,
Maybe
we
we
can-
should start, we should probably start the
fix
engine
that.
soon. Yeah,
Look
but not
forward to
next
that.
time, but soon-ish. This side over here should be in for the time being. No, that was gibberish. Absolute gibberish.
Use your words, eh?